Hello, and welcome to this event for the 2021 Cambridge Festival, a discussion of the online exhibition Slavery and Abolition Collections Uncovered, which is a collaboration between St John's College Library and Wisbech and Fenland Museum. My name's Adam Crothers, and as well as being a writer and a teacher of poetry, I'm the Special Collections Assistant at St John's. We're recording this event on the morning of Monday, the 15th of March, and until yesterday evening, I was expecting only to be giving the intro and outro. Sadly, a sudden onset of thankfully minor illness has robbed us of our expected host, who's currently convalescing, and so I will be attempting to host the discussion as well. Ordinarily, a festival exhibition at St John's would take place in the 17th century old library, and over the course of a single day, we would expect to welcome hundreds of people into the building. Present circumstances, of course, don't allow for such a setup, and so we've gone online. And we decided to arrange this panel discussion as a gesture towards the exchange of ideas that can create such a buzz as people mingle around exhibition cases. We will have those days again very soon, we hope. I'm very grateful to our panelists for finding space in their schedules during difficult times to respond to some of the items in the library and museum collections. And I'm really pleased that we've been able to track down participants whose experience and expertise intersect with the exhibition's themes in such illuminating ways. I'm now going to invite the panelists to introduce themselves, starting with Carol, who unfortunately is having some technical issues today, so is only joining us via audio, although we are, of course, still delighted to have her. Carol.
Good morning. My name is Carol Brown-Leonardi, and I am a social anthropologist from the Open University.
Thank you, Carol. And Sabine.
Good morning. My name is Sabine Cadeau. I am a historian of the Caribbean Atlantic world and modern Latin America, and I am currently a postdoctoral fellow at the university researching Cambridge's financial ties to the legacies of enslavement.
Thank you. And Maaha.
Hi, I'm Maaha Elahi. I'm less experienced than these lovely ladies. I'm actually a student. I'm the Black Asian minority ethnic officer of the Samuel Butler Room, which is the Postgraduate Society of St John's. I'm the first officer, and I am also a criminology student. I'm currently doing an MPhil in criminology, and I'm researching the experiences of Black people in the criminal justice system.
Thank you, Maaha. And Rebecca.
Thank you for having me today. I'm Rebecca. I am a PhD student at the University of Hull's Wilberforce Institute, and my research looks at how museums across the UK engage with anti-slavery as both a historic and a contemporary issue. And I'm also one of the collections development officers at Lincolnshire County Council's Heritage Service as well.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. It's so lovely to have you all here. Now, our expected host, I imagine, would have begun by giving a couple of his initial reactions to the exhibition text, which you were all sent, and then inviting you all to do the same. And I suppose I can do a version of that, but my reaction to the text was, of course, happening while co-curating the whole thing. And I thought I might as well mention a couple of concerns that I had while putting it together. One of them was something that's quite standard for someone who works in a library and occasionally has to write exhibition material, which is that you're not always necessarily an expert on the topic. You might know a little bit about the material, you might have catalogued some of it or met researchers who do actually know what they're talking about, but you do not claim to be an authority, but have to at least give that impression. And the other thing I was very aware of was that any exhibition, whether it's on a sensitive topic or not, and whether this is being done deliberately or not, is necessarily going to impose some kind of a narrative on the material. And I was very aware of being a white dude at a library in Cambridge and wondering quite a lot of the time if I actually had any right to be going anywhere near this topic. And So I suppose a question that I might ask to kick things off is, what do you think the risks are with imposing any kind of a narrative, any sort of a tidy story on a topic as huge and complex as slavery and abolition? Or looking at it another way, when you hear that somebody is putting together an exhibition on this topic, what are your expectations and what are your concerns?
Well, I think it's very important to look at timelines and to be objective. And objective is very important when putting these things together, because if one is objective, then you can look at the whole story, and because there are many narratives attached to objects, and the objects in themselves tell a story. We all have our own ideas, and it's not I suppose a factor of whether one is white or black or anything like that. It's really, you know, sort of looking at things with space, which is between yourself and the object, and thinking about the time in terms of the historical events that surround those objects. Thank you.
You know, history is about contestation. So inviting different perspectives, people from different experiences, with different historical experience is very important to the conversation. So for me, you know, I think it makes sense to think, you know, how does one relate to a source as a female, as a white person, or as a Black woman. You know, it's hard. It's hard for me to imagine that one's historical experience does not shape the way one does not shape or the way one looks at a document, the way one reads a document, because the present very much informs how others look at the past. And so, yeah, a range of different people bring out more, I think, the different kinds of interpretations, and also not just the historical interpretation, but also the memory, how history is remembered and narrated, and as well as thinking about why different groups of people remember history in particular ways. So, and for me, as a historian, and also as a descendant of Africans, I do come to the documents with these different identities as a historian, but also as a descendant, and trying to they're not easily separated when I look at the historical documents. So I guess in that sense, in some ways, what I am saying is, to your response about race, I think race actually does matter.
I would agree with Sabine. I think it's one of the challenges in being a museum curator or a person who writes exhibition interpretation or puts exhibitions together, in terms of assessing your own position on any topic or the material that you're working with, and how you balance that with providing some level of objectivity within interpretation. Sometimes I think that is probably one of the most difficult tasks, aside from obviously doing the actual historical research about the material, I think that is a really big part of the job and a really important part of the job, in putting anything together. And I think that sometimes it is impossible, and where it's impossible, that is okay, as long as there is an acknowledgement of your position as the person who has created that interpretation. And so then the audiences who are going to experience what you've put together are aware of the position that you came to it from, and then they can position themselves either in line with your own position or from a different perspective, but at least they're informed. And I think that's something that we have to get to grips with in doing work like this, is that Doug Hamilton actually wrote about this in 2007. He wrote about an exhibition he produced for the bicentenary of the abolition of the British slave trade, and he actually wrote that you can't please everybody. And I think that was quite a good insight into working on not just this kind of topic, but on a range of historical topics. When you put exhibitions together, it is really difficult to balance all those different expectations.
Also, also historians like to talk about objectivity. What is objectivity? Who defines whether a work is objective or not? At the turn of the century, Black women did not really write about the sexual exploitation of women and of women during slavery in its aftermath. The Academy did not consider such a study objective. There are historians who would argue that a study of reparation for slavery is not objective. That's not history. These views are constantly changing, and we especially in the last 10 years, and especially now, more and more reparation is considered is acknowledged as a topic of historical inquiry, as a topic of political inquiry. And so much of the question of objectivity has to do with questions of politics, whether politics can be disassociated from history, whether politics can be disassociated from the questions that we ask about the past. And I tend to think that we can't. We can't, at least, and maybe some do, and maybe some historians do, but I don't. The present really matter to me, and it informs the questions that I ask, and I don't think I'm the only one. And so, but objectivity is a very sensitive question, and what I can say about that is, well, I take issue with objectivity. As a scholar, I am constantly asking myself, am I being faithful to the past? Am I really understanding the document? I take a lot of time with documents. I could, really too long in some ways. Just trying to think about, am I really seeing what is really happening? So I ask myself these questions. So recognizing that I am political and that the historian can be political does not mean that I can't be objective, whatever that means. So
something I thought I might ask Maaha was for a perspective from the point of view of someone who is a student at St. John's, again, coming to this exhibition, because Thomas Clarkson and William Wilberforce, two significant abolitionists, were members of St. John's, and the college likes to make a point of this. But of course, one of the other figures who features in the exhibition is William Perrin, who was a slave owner and whose nephew and heir, Henry Fitzherbert, was a member of St. John's as well. And I wonder what it was like for you, especially in a kind of historically significant role on the SPR at St. John's, looking at this exhibition from a college that might be quite happy to talk up some of its positive connections to the abolition movement, but maybe hasn't always been entirely open about acknowledging its connections to the negative side.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I was deeply uncomfortable when I read about William Perrin and his heir, and the involvement with St. John's, and just knowing that someone who inherited from the slave trade was at my college so long ago, but was at my college, and that people like me and other people of color, and particularly Black people, now are living in the exact same place that people like him lived in. It's shocking. It's deeply shocking. And I think that in a way, yes, I think St. John's do shy away from that sort of horrific nature of their past and the nature of the people that actually came to Cambridge and came to St. John's. And I think it's something that is definitely worth talking about. I also do think that St. John's, I think there isn't much that's said about even Thomas Clarkson and William Wilberforce. I know that St. John's make it very clear that they're proud that these abolitionists did go to John's, but from a student perspective, I mean, I did my undergrad at St. John's as well, and I don't remember people really talking about that too much. I don't remember people really making it clear that we were at an institution that was historically significant for that reason. And I mean, for example, in my Freshers Week, I remember we had a talk on the history of the college, and it was more to do with the history of the architecture and things like that. And so it wasn't, I feel like they could have spoken about these historical figures and talked about the realities of it. So not just the good that they did, but also the bad. And they could have mentioned figures like William Perrin, and they didn't take that opportunity to. And I think it's a reflection of the conservative nature of Cambridge and St. John's at times. I mean, I'm the first BAME officer. They didn't have one before, and they have one on the JCR, the Junior Common Room, which is the undergrad society. And when I had that role in my undergrad, I didn't really get the opportunity to do much. And now that I'm on the postgraduate society, I mean, when I became a postgraduate, I was shocked that they didn't actually have a BAME officer. They didn't have anyone representing people of ethnic minority heritage. And when you look around, St. John's isn't very diverse. And I just think that there more needs to be done in general to talk about these issues. And in a way, I do believe St. John's does shy away from these issues because they're so controversial. And I think now more than ever, it's important that we talk about these things. I mean, we saw the growth of the Black Lives Matter movement very recently, and this shouldn't just be something that's just mentioned because it's current in the media and then we turn away from it. I think institutions like St. John's need to take more action and talk about these things in general.
I was actually cataloguing some of the William Perrin correspondence just under a year ago, when all of the George Floyd protests and so on were taking place. And that was a very, very strange experience to be dealing with all of this historical material while a new version of this or a continuation of this historical narrative was literally happening in the news, literally happening in the other window on my browser. It's very, very strange. Which might bring me on quite neatly to another question that I'd wanted to ask. We've put a content warning at the beginning of the exhibition text, partly because slave owners and white abolitionists alike often used what would today be considered racially insensitive language, but also because abolitionists sometimes used some pretty stark images and some quite grim descriptions in order to enlighten their audience as to the horrific ways in which enslaved people were being treated. And I wanted to ask a bit about shock value, and if you feel, for instance, that these images and descriptions are still shocking today, and if you think that there is value in trying to shock people out of complacency with regard to issues of inequality and oppression.
That's a powerful question. And I think what we see with this history is the power of the image, you know, and Thomas Clarkson knew the power of visuals to expose Black oppression, to expose injustice, and to educate the public, right? So and I think in our lifetime, especially recently with George Floyd, we see that exposing the horror of slavery, the brutality of you know, of history is actually very significant, and has the capacity to transform public consciousness, to transform public opinion. And you know, the video of George Floyd's murder in May, for example, reminded us of that. You know, it sparked protests worldwide. People were very aware of police brutality, of the of white police officers killing black men. But seeing that video, and seeing the, you know, like the way that, you know, that George Floyd was killed, you know, really moved people. So unfortunately, exposing the violence, exposing the terror that takes place is inescapable, it seems. So, and when you think about the 1807 Abolition Bill, there's no way you can separate that bill with the work of these images of the horror of the slave ship, you know, the scale model. So yeah.
To just oh, sorry.
No, you go ahead.
I just wanted to return to your first point, Adam, about having a language warning, because I think that's a really good example of best practice within kind of museums, exhibitions, cultural organisations at the moment. I think that it's a reflection on our audiences and how active and aware audiences have become. And I think that's really increased over the past, I would say definitely 12 months in response to the Black Lives Matter protest, but I think it was increasing before that as well. And I think it's a really powerful thing for an organisation to have enough self-reflection to be able to acknowledge that audiences may question some of the content within an exhibition. I think that's really a positive thing to have. I think in relation to the shock factor of images, I think Thomas Clarkson was absolutely on board with using and manipulating the shock factor. He actually wrote about that in his work, in the volume of evidence that he provided to Wilberforce and to Parliament in the abolition campaign for the first time to abolish the slave trade. And he wrote about how powerful that was in actually changing people's minds. And I think when you appreciate what the abolitionists at that time were up against, which was you know, a wide acceptance of slavery and Britain's role in perpetrating that system, I think it was always going to take something significant or something that that did make people uncomfortable and did raise eyebrows for people to change their minds. And I think as a campaigning tactic, and something that political organisations and campaigns and other NGOs have adopted throughout history since then, I think it's also been quite successful. And I'm just thinking of an example recently in 2015 when the Home Office launched their Slavery is Closer Than You Think campaign in relation to modern slavery in Britain, which came out alongside the Modern Slavery Act when that was introduced, and they launched a TV advertisement campaign and posters, and I think there were leaflets and social media campaign. It was really widespread, and the point of that was to shock people in that slavery could exist today in your community next door. And while it didn't use particularly graphic images in terms of violence, I think what it did do was include a shock value in terms of poverty and the poor conditions that those people could potentially be in. So I think there's a different scale, a sliding scale of shock value, but I think the principle of using it and the power of it to a campaign remains the same.
The shock value is needed. With Judge Floyd, we see that he's the police officer. He's I guess we'd say that Judge Floyd is handcuffed and pinned to the knee, and handcuffed and pinned to the ground by an officer's knee. That's what people remember. It's like, and that's what you see in the Black Lives Matter protests as well. That people are making references to the knee. So it's in seeing that he was killed in he was killed for at least 8 minutes and 50 seconds. The world watched him, and with the officer's knee on him, right? That had a powerful impact. But at the same time, when we think about the history of Black oppression in particular, I also think we also need to think about what it means to have images that are constantly exposing Blacks as victims, exposing Blacks in exposing the violence against Black people, as opposed to images of Black insurgency, Black rebellion, Blacks standing up for themselves. So, and I mentioned that because those are the kinds of images that Thomas Clarkson and William Wilberforce strategically avoided in their campaign to abolish the slave trade. I mean, this doesn't in slavery. Those images do not really come up, and there's a range of reasons for that. But strategically, it would not have helped them. That's one reason that they do not come up. But strategically, also, there's the fear of Black insurgency. There's the fear of Black power. So this is also meant to be a campaign to appease white people, to appease members of parliament. That even if we abolish the slave trade, as a matter of fact, abolishing the slave trade will contribute to a policy of containment and control. Right. So we also have to think about the work that these images do. What kind of stories are they telling about Blacks when they are created?
Thomas Clarkson was a very good curator in terms of the chest that he pulled together and what he wanted to highlight with that. But like Sabine said, there's definitely stories and narratives that were not included because they didn't fit with that overall narrative of how the abolitionists at that time wanted to push their cause. And I think that's a real reflection on how we in public organisations are now unpicking some of what the abolitionists have done, because museums in the UK have got over a century of a tradition of interpreting abolitionists. At the early 19th century, the earliest museums that did it, you know, really held them up as local heroes, figures that were, you know, held up to inspire civic pride within their local towns. And I'm thinking particularly of the Wisbech and Fenland Museum, obviously, which is the home of Thomas Clarkson, and they still have a display about him today. And also the Wilberforce House Museum in Hull, which is housed in Wilberforce's birthplace. And even in the earliest guidebooks for those organisations, the narrative is around showcasing the stories of those individuals and creating spaces that were almost kind of walk through memorials to the achievements of those men. And 100 years ago, we wouldn't have been questioning, we certainly wouldn't as curators, and audiences wouldn't have been questioning any of what was left out of those men's work. And so I think it really speaks to the position that we're in now as a society, that we're able to ask the questions about, well, what was left out and why did they leave it out? And I think that's even happened in the last decade, and certainly in 2007, which was a massive year for exhibitions and interpretation of these histories within museums, cultural organisations, community projects. A lot of the critique that was levelled at 2007 at that time was that it was a Wilbur farce or a Wilbur fest. I love those words, but essentially it means that that the focus was too much on those traditional abolitionist narratives, and the highlights of those narratives at that time were the abolitionists again. And I think now, a decade on, we are in a position to be able to start to analyse and reflect on the different dynamics and the nuances within the abolitionist campaigns that have always been there, but have never served any benefit to be unpicked before.
I mean, a big part of the story, and what I see, the repeating silences that I see, the systematic silences that I see, is the story of the Haitian Revolution. It's the story of Black insurgency, the role of the Baptist Rebellion in 1831 is not insignificant to the story of the abolition of slavery. The Haitian Revolution, by 1804, before the 1807 Abolition Bill, we have the overthrow of colonial slavery in Saint-Domingue, Haiti, and Clarkson knew it. Clarkson had many points of contact with Haiti. Clarkson and Brissot, when they hear actually about the Haitian Revolution, they don't believe it. They think printers are exaggerating it. So, but you know, abolitionism, the work of played an important role in contributing to the Abolition Bill, obviously, right? This was a work that started in the second half of the 18th century with the French Enlightenment and also with British abolitionists. But we cannot avoid the fact that the Abolition Bill comes after a long, protracted slave revolution in the Caribbean, of which the British is actually very involved. You know, the British actually even try to exploit the chaos and try to take over Haiti. And in the British Caribbean, and then we have rebellions in the British Caribbean because French republicanism, incite rebellions in Grenada, in St. Vincent, in St. Lucia, to the point where we even have a British governor who is killed, right? And so the fear of insurrection for members of parliament and for British slaveholders is a reality, not just because of the fear, not just because of the Haitian Revolution. It's not just the fear of Haiti, but it was actually a real fear in British Caribbean territories, right? And so for me, looking at the importance of the historical context, it helps us to tell to connect the story of abolition with the dramatic rebellions that is happening in the Caribbean in this period, and to understand that the Abolition Bill, the 1807 Abolition Bill, comes in the context of a successful revolution. It occurs in turbulent times, and so it's far more complex than Clarkson and William Wilberforce. And as a matter of fact, in many ways, I think we could I think you can see that there's an argument to be made that the Haitian Revolution and the rebellions in the British Caribbean in the 1790s contribute to gradualism, to the politics of gradualism, and to the politics of amelioration of slavery. And in that sense, Abolition Bill can also be seen as an effort to tighten up slavery, to maintain colonial possessions throughout the Americas. The impact of the Haitian Revolution contributes to further repression into the tightening of laws. In Cuba, we always see that in North America, to the point where in 1791, I believe Charleston, South Carolina, shut down its ports. So shut down its ports to stop the importation of slaves. And so in the British context, I think what I see is that there's a certain kind of tightening that occurs as well, and it occurs with 1807 Abolition Bill. They're not ready to abolish slavery, but perhaps with the Abolition Bill, we can actually prevent the fear of another Haiti, prevent the fear of insurrection in the British Caribbean, which the British, again, had direct experience with. And so this is not to minimize the role of abolition. This is to say that abolitionists themselves were very, were very affected by that, by the dramatic rebellions during this period, and that Black insurgency does play a significant role in bringing about the Abolition Bill.
And I think this is very important, because if you think about it, throughout the 1700s to 1831, you have revolutions, quite a few of them. I mean, in 1760, you've got the Tacky Revolution, which is in Jamaica. 1789, there's the Haitian Revolution, and then there's the Fenland Revolution in Grenada in 1700s. 1816, then there's Barbados, which is the Busher slave revolution, and then 1831, then there's Sam Sharp, which is a major slave revolution in Jamaica. And in a sense as well, I think we have to be thankful to abolitionists, because they also enhance the urgency of the abolition of slavery. I think in a way, should we celebrate them? I think in a way that we should, because they also contributed, as well as the revolutions, they also contributed to the abolition of slavery. But at the same time, I do believe that there should be a fuller story of how slavery ended, that that it is not just one dimensional, there's more dimensions to this.
I think the language in the 1807 Abolition Bill is remarkable, and so it says the African slave trade is contrary to the principles of justice, humanity, and sound policy. And one wonders, what is sound policy? What does that mean? So the language of the Abolition Bill tells us that this is not just about morality. Morality. There is a change in morality that does take place. And Clarkson is one of the figures who argue that the slave trade is immoral. And at that time, it's conceivable that he also thought the same about slavery. But slavery is not abolished yet. It's not sound policy, right? But sound policy for me is can also be strategically related to the question of containment and control, the fear of black insurrection. So the slave trade is contrary to sound policy. So right, and so the point is there are a combination of factors that contribute to abolition, and the bill itself tells us begs us to ask more questions.
This is all so fascinating, and I'm so disappointed that we are approaching the end of our hour. What I might conclude by asking everybody is to bring things back to the exhibition itself, and to round off our discussion. What, if anything, do you feel you might be taking away from this specific exhibition, this specific, very limited narrative? Or alternatively, what do you hope other people reading it and looking at these images, considering these objects, thinking about some of these dynamics, might take away from it?
I think one thing that particularly struck me was making links between what I was reading about slavery and abolition and today. And so we've spoken a lot about the Black Lives Matter movement and the horrific death of George Floyd. And I just, as I was reading these pages, I just thought, the oppression hasn't ended. And I think what people should take away from this is that this isn't just a matter of history. This isn't something that's been solved already. Like, while slavery has ended, there is still modern slavery, and also the oppression of Black people still continues. And there's a lot of similarities between what we've read here and what's in the exhibition and what still goes on today. So, for example, as Sabine was saying about, we're not talking enough about Black power. And this is an example of, the celebration of white people, solving this issue, which is worth celebrating, but also it's Black power isn't celebrated in that same way. And I think that that's a problem. And we can see that with, for example, the toppling of the Edward Colston statue, that those people are still prosecuted. And, the fact that that was an act of protest and that was their freedom of expression wasn't enough to stop them from being actually prosecuted. And would it have been the same if it was someone white doing it, or if, you know, it was a different situation that didn't involve Black people? Who knows? So I think it's important to draw similarities between what we're reading here and what the exhibition is about, and how these problems still exist in today's society.
I take note of every single time I hear somebody today emphasize that it was legal at the time. It was legal at the time. And here, apparently, you know, we are thrust back to the debates of the 18th century. And so ideas about morality, legitimacy, justice, dissent, and rebellion are all open for philosophical and political interpretation. And when we look at the work of the abolitionist, Thomas Clarkson in particular, we are reminded that at the time, and I think this is the power of historical documents, it's in 1807 Abolition Bill in particular, and also other writings from Clarkson, that at the time in the 18th century, already by the mid 18th century in Europe, in Britain, we have people who thought that slavery was immoral, who thought that the slave trade was immoral and incompatible with the principles of justice and humanity. So that legal does not mean that does not mean moral. That there was contestation. There was contestation about that. So for me, it's quite the abolitionism, the history of abolitionism and white abolitionism, white abolitionist and Black abolitionist, the history. But in particular, for me, I even want to use the white abolitionist debate in this particular case to, in British abolitionists in particular, to say that yes, yes, there were people at the time who thought that slavery was immoral, and so it's a very complicated question, and using the law to argue against the claims of people of African descent, to argue against reparation, does not quite work. And in some ways, even the Abolition Bill itself is a document that says, yes, there are members of Parliament who recognize that it's antithetical to the principles of justice and humanity, but because of sound policy, we will maintain slavery, so that the debate was always much bigger than a question of legality. It was about maintaining an economic system that was extremely profitable for Europe. And so yeah, so it resonates with the debates that we have today about slavery and abolition.
One of the things that I think is great about the exhibition is that it brings together the selection of materials and objects and images for display in a way that hasn't been done before. And I always think for anyone to put together an exhibition that creates new combinations of objects and narratives together, and here specifically we're looking at the tradition that St. John's has had of highlighting Wilberforce and Clarkson, to now bring that narrative of the slave trader as a contrast into that, I think is really an interesting step forward for St. John, and it's great to see that in the exhibition. I hope that what the audiences get from this is an insight, as we've discussed this morning, into the nuances within the abolition campaign and some of the challenging things that the abolitionists did. I think there has been a huge tradition in this country of holding up the abolitionist movement as a hugely significant movement within our British national identity, in cementing this country as a humanitarian world leader, because we abolished the slave trade first. And I think that this exhibition is a really strong example of beginning to question some of that, and a testament to the fact that, as I said before, we are now as a society in a position where those questions can and should be asked. So I think that's really great.
You know, I call this St. John's coming out exhibition, right? So it's you know, we've been talking about abolition, right? We've been talking about humanitarianism, but now we're talking about slavery, and acknowledging that St. John's has connections to slavery, and that is there is a great beginning to have a discussion about the legacies of enslavement, to look at the historical documents, and to look at this really complex entanglement, this complex history of slavery and abolition. So I would, you know, it was really exciting.
Yeah, I was going to say that I think it's very exciting, and I think it's the irony is that the first slave ship, which was the Jesus Christ de Lombic, was owned by a clergyman, Reverend John Hawkins of the Church of England, who actually sold the Moors for 25, I think it was £25 each for each slave. And that was the beginning of the change of, you know, the slave concept, which was originally something that was about working to, you know, pay off somebody a loan or something like that. And looking at a perspective in which people were seen differently as chattel. And the irony of England being the first country to really abolish slavery. And, you know, I think this is a wonderful reflection, really, that we have to take on. And I think it's, again, a very good thing to open up this conversation in terms of how universities are connected to the colonization and enslavement of people, as well as looking at how universities can begin to decolonize themselves educationally as well, in terms of reflecting society as a whole. So yeah, I think this has been a very good conversation indeed.
Brilliant. There's
a lot to be taken away when one has a look at the exhibition. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carol. Thank you to all of you. It is it has been so fascinating and so instructive to hear all of your insights. If I had my way, we would do another hour, which I'm sure we would fill up very easily. But our time is up, and so I will say thank you again to Carol, to Sabine, to Maaha, and to Rebecca. Thank you so much to everybody for watching and listening to this discussion. If you haven't checked out the exhibition yet, please do. We hope that you enjoy it and take something away from it. And we also hope that we will be able to welcome you in person to St. John's College Library and to Wisbech and Fenland Museum before too long. Take care and goodbye.